You ever notice how gas stations after midnight feel like they're just barely clinging to reality? Like they know they should exist, but only because you need them to. Fluorescent lights buzzing like a nervous habit, one sleepy attendant pretending not to notice you, and shelves stocked with snacks that have somehow been there since 2004. You stop for gas, maybe a bathroom break, and you tell yourself it's safe because it's familiar. But the thing is, familiar doesn't mean safe. Tonight, we're taking a drive down some long, lonely roads, places where travelers pulled in for a quick fill-up and never quite managed to pull back out. Maybe the desert swallowed them, maybe the woods did, or maybe something was waiting behind the ice machine. So top off your tank, check your rearview mirror, and try not to make eye contact with anyone lingering too long in the shadows. These are 3 gas station stories where travelers vanished after midnight. Because out there, after midnight, some destinations don't come with a return route. This story takes place about 3 years ago when I was driving cross-country from Los Angeles to Austin for a new job opportunity. I'm calling this one The Last Fill-Up. I'd been on the road for about 14 hours straight that day, pushing myself way harder than I should have because I wanted to make good time. By around 1:30 a.m., I was somewhere in eastern Arizona, fighting to keep my eyes open on a stretch of highway that seemed to have been forgotten by civilization. My gas gauge had been hovering just above empty for the last 20 miles, and the anxiety of potentially running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere was the only thing keeping me alert. When I spotted the faint glow of lights in the distance, the relief was immediate. It was one of those independent gas stations, not a chain, just some local place with an old-fashioned sign that read "Last Chance Gas" in flickering red neon. As I pulled off the highway, the first thing that struck me was how bright the place was. The fluorescent lights under the canopy were cranked to maximum, creating this harsh bubble of white light that stood out against the absolute darkness of the desert night. There were 4 pumps arranged in 2 islands, all of them empty. The convenience store attached to the station had lights on inside too, but something about it seemed off, like it was lit up for show rather than for business. I pulled up to the pump closest to the store and killed the engine. The silence was immediate and absolute. No distant traffic, no insects, nothing but the soft tick of my car's cooling engine and the barely perceptible buzz of those fluorescent lights overhead. The air outside was still furnace hot despite the late hour, a dry heat that seemed to pull the moisture from your lungs with each breath. The station itself looked like it had been built sometime in the 80s and hadn't seen much maintenance since. The white paint on the cinder block building was yellowed and peeling, and the asphalt lot was cracked and buckled in places, with weeds pushing through. Behind the station, there was nothing but flat desert stretching out to meet distant mountains, their outlines barely visible against the night sky. I tried to pay at the pump, but the card reader was dead. Not just declining my card, completely dead. No lights, no display. I sighed, grabbed my wallet, and headed toward the store. As I approached, I could see someone moving around inside, a lone figure behind the counter. That was reassuring. I'd half expected the place to be completely abandoned despite the lights. The doors were the typical glass sliding type you see at convenience stores, but when I tried to pull them open, they didn't budge. I could see they were locked from the inside. I cupped my hands around my eyes and peered through the glass. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, was looking right at me but making no move to come to the door. I knocked and called out, "Hey, I just need some gas." My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet. The man didn't respond. He just kept staring, his expression blank. Then slowly he shook his head from side to side. It wasn't a no gesture. It was more like a warning. That's when I felt the first tremor under my feet. It was subtle, like a truck passing on a nearby road, except there was no road and no truck, just a faint vibration coming up through the cracked asphalt. I glanced down and could have sworn I saw the ground pulse, just once, like something taking a breath. When I looked back up, the attendant was gone. The store was empty, though the lights remained on. I backed away from the door, suddenly uneasy. That's when I noticed something odd about the surveillance cameras mounted at the corners of the building. They were all hanging limp, their wires cut and dangling. I decided this place wasn't worth the trouble. I'd just get back in my car and try to make it to the next town. But as I turned around, I froze. About 50 yards away, at the edge, where the station's bright lights faded into darkness, stood a figure. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing in my direction. In the poor light, I couldn't make out any features, just a human-shaped silhouette, slightly too tall, slightly too thin. My heart rate kicked up a notch, and I quickly walked back to my car, keeping my eyes on the figure. It didn't move, but I had the distinct feeling it was watching me. I got into my car and turned the key, relieved when the engine started right away. As the headlights came on, I saw that the figure was gone. I put the car in drive, but before I could pull away, I noticed something in my rearview mirror, another figure emerging from the darkness behind the station, and then another coming from the side, and another. Within moments, there were at least a dozen of them, forming a loose semicircle around the back of the station, all standing motionless, all facing me. The desert wind picked up suddenly, carrying a low, whispering sound that might have been voices, might have been sand shifting over stone. I hit the gas, intending to pull out onto the highway and get the hell away from there, but I'd only gone a few feet when more figures appeared directly in front of me, blocking the exit to the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the loose gravel. The figures didn't react, didn't scatter or approach. They just stood there. In the beam of my headlights, I could see them more clearly now, and I almost wish I couldn't. They looked human, but wrong somehow. Their proportions slightly off, their skin too smooth and uniform like mannequins. They had no distinguishing features I could discern, no clothing or hair, just these blank person-shaped forms. I backed up and tried another exit, but more figures appeared, closing the gap. They were surrounding the station now, a ring of silent watchers slowly contracting inward. I realized with mounting horror that they were herding me back toward the store. I was trapped, the figures now forming a complete circle around the gas station, standing just at the edge of the light. My car was idling in the middle of it all, and I was frantically trying to think of a way out. I couldn't just drive through them. Whatever they were, I wasn't willing to find out what would happen if I made contact. The ground trembled again, stronger this time. The vibration ran through the car, making the steering wheel shudder in my hands. In the harsh light of the gas station, I could see the asphalt rippling like water, cracks spreading outward from a central point directly beneath one of the gas pumps. That's when I noticed something about these figures. They were all leaning slightly, their featureless heads tilted toward that same spot under the pump, not looking at me at all. I was just in their way. The trembling intensified. The overhead lights began to flicker, and in those momentary flashes of darkness, I swear the figures moved closer, though I never actually saw them step forward. The cracked asphalt beneath the pump split wider, and a sound rose from it, a low, resonant hum that I felt more than heard, like standing next to massive power lines. Suddenly, the lights inside the store went out. In the darkness, I could see the attendant again, standing at the window, staring out. He placed his hand against the glass and mouthed something I couldn't understand. Then he pointed urgently toward the highway. The gas pump nearest to the growing crack in the ground began to shake, not from the tremors. This was different, more deliberate. It rocked back and forth, metal groaning, until it tore free from its concrete base with a sound like ripping fabric. It hovered there for a moment, suspended in midair, before crashing down on its side. Dark fluid leaked out, not gasoline, too thick, too dark, glistening oddly in the flickering light. The silent figures began to sway in unison, still focused on that spreading crack in the ground. The desert wind picked up again, hot and dry, carrying that whispering sound. Only now I could almost make out words, almost understand what they were saying, and the near comprehension was somehow more terrifying than complete mystery. I don't know what made me do it, but I suddenly gunned the engine and aimed my car straight for the thinnest part of their circle, toward the highway. The figures didn't move to stop me. They seemed completely absorbed in whatever was happening at the center of the station. As I accelerated toward them, they parted, not hurriedly or deliberately, but flowing aside like smoke, reforming behind me as I passed through. I hit the highway doing 70 and didn't slow down. In my rearview mirror, I could see the gas station's lights flickering wildly now, the circle of figures tightening, converging on that crack in the ground. Then, just as I rounded a bend in the road, all the lights went out at once, plunging the station into complete darkness. The last thing I saw was a vertical slash of deeper blackness rising from where the crack had been, like a tear in the night itself, and the figures flowing toward it like water down a drain. I drove non-stop for 2 hours until I reached a town large enough to have a 24-hour chain gas station with people and cars and normalcy. I filled my tank, went inside, bought coffee, and sat in my car until sunrise, too wired and terrified to sleep. The next day, after getting a motel room and finally getting some rest, I looked up the gas station online. I couldn't find any record of a place matching that description on that stretch of highway. I even checked satellite images, nothing there but empty desert. 3 weeks later, after I'd settled into my new place in Austin, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, just my name and my new address, which I hadn't shared with many people yet. Inside was a gas station receipt, yellow and brittle like it was decades old, though the date on it was the night of my encounter, and scrawled across the back in shaky handwriting, "They weren't there for you." I've never driven through Arizona since. I fly when I need to go west, or I take the long way around. Sometimes I dream about that night, about the silent figures and the crack in the earth. But mostly I dream about that final glimpse in my rearview mirror, that vertical slash of absolute darkness rising into the sky, and the horrible certainty that something was coming through. And sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and pull into a gas station, I find myself checking the ground beneath the pumps, looking for cracks. This one's actually something that happened to me about 3 years back, when I was driving cross-country after I left an old job. That job seemed to be an endless drain on my patience. I'm calling this story Endless Pump. I'd been on the road for 8 days straight, living out of my Subaru Outback, taking the scenic routes whenever possible. Something about putting distance between myself and my old life in Boston. There's something therapeutic about watching the odometer tick up as you leave your problems behind. I was cutting through rural West Virginia, somewhere near the Virginia border, probably about 20 miles south of Huntington. It was late August, one of those nights where the air hangs so thick with humidity, you feel like you're swimming through it. I'd been driving since dawn, and the clock on my dashboard read 11:42 p.m. when I spotted the glow of a gas station just off Highway 52. The place was called Mercer's Gas and Grocery, according to the half-lit neon sign that buzzed and flickered above the single-story building. The G in grocery was completely dark, and the R blinked irregularly, like it was sending out a distress signal in Morse code. I pulled in, relieved. My gas light had been on for the past 30 miles, and I wasn't keen on getting stranded in the Appalachian foothills after midnight. The station appeared closed, the interior lights were off, and a handwritten sign on the door clearly stated "Closed 10 p.m." But the pumps were still running, which wasn't unusual for rural places with card readers. I parked at Pump 2, closest to the building, and stepped out into the thick night air. The crickets were almost deafening, their synchronized chirping echoing off the hills that loomed around the station like silent sentinels. I stretched, my back cracking after hours behind the wheel. As I was inserting my card into the reader, I noticed something odd at the far end of the station. Pump 4, the one furthest from the building, was running. The digital display was lit up and counting, numbers steadily ticking upward. $78.45, $78.49, $78.54. What caught my attention wasn't just that the pump was active, it was that there was no vehicle. The nozzle was inserted into something, but from my angle I couldn't see what. I figured someone had forgotten to hang it up properly. I started pumping my own gas and tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, careful to avoid the large cracks in the concrete that spiderwebbed out from beneath pump 4. As I got closer, I realized the nozzle wasn't just hanging, it was actively dispensing fuel. The trigger was locked in place and gasoline was flowing steadily out. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The nozzle wasn't inserted into a container or lying on the ground creating a puddle. It was suspended about a foot off the cracked concrete, pointing downward, and the fuel was disappearing into nothing. It was as if there was an invisible funnel right there in midair, swallowing every drop. $86.72, $86.76, $86.81. I blinked hard, wondering if the long drive had messed with my head. I reached out tentatively, waving my hand under the stream of gasoline, expecting to feel the wet splash of fuel on my skin. Nothing. My hand passed through dry air, yet I could smell the sharp chemical odor of the gasoline. I could hear the liquid flowing through the nozzle. I stepped back, heart suddenly hammering in my chest. The concrete beneath pump 4 was severely cracked, with a distinct depression around it, as if the ground were slowly sinking. The digital counter kept ticking upward, gasoline disappearing into that invisible void. A faint dripping sound drew my attention downward. I crouched and pressed my ear near one of the larger cracks in the concrete. The dripping echoed from deep below, hollow and distant, like water falling into a massive cavern. Wouldn't get too close if I were you. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man stood a few feet away, mid-50s, gaunt, with deep-set eyes that reflected the flickering neon. He wore a faded Mercer's polo shirt and was leaning on a push broom. "Jesus Christ," I gasped, hand on my chest. "You scared the hell out of me." "Sorry about that," he said, though his expression didn't match the apology. "Just finishing up." "I thought the station was closed," I said. "And it is." He glanced at pump 4, then quickly away, as if avoiding eye contact with it. "Just doing some cleanup." I pointed at the running pump. "What's going on with that? It's just dispensing into nothing." The clerk's shoulders tensed visibly. "Faulty equipment. Been meaning to get it fixed." His voice was flat, rehearsed. "But where's the gas going?" I pressed. "It's just vanishing." He shrugged, eyes darting nervously to the ground beneath the pump. "Like I said, it's broken. Don't worry about it." "Shouldn't you shut it off? That's a lot of fuel going to waste." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Waste implies there's somewhere better for it to go." I frowned, noticing now that the depression around pump 4 wasn't just cracked concrete. It was actually sloping downward, as if the entire area was slowly being pulled into the earth. The metal frame of the pump itself was tilted at a slight angle. "How long has it been running like that?" I asked. The clerk's eyes flicked to mine, then away. "What day is it?" "Tuesday, August 24th. He seemed to calculate something in his head. "About 4 days this time." "This time?" He ignored the question. "Your pump's done," he said, nodding toward my Subaru. I glanced back. He was right. My tank was full. I replaced the nozzle and screwed my gas cap back on, but I couldn't tear my attention away from pump 4, still steadily dispensing fuel into nothingness. $118.29, $118.34, $118.38. "Look," I said, "I don't mean to pry, but something's clearly not right here. If there's a leak, it could contaminate groundwater, cause an explosion." "Ain't no leak," he cut me off. "And it ain't contaminating nothing. It's going exactly where it's supposed to go." A sudden gust of wind swept through the station, carrying with it a putrid odor, not just gasoline, but something else. Something organic and rotten, like decaying vegetation mixed with sulfur. I covered my nose. "What the hell is that smell?" The clerk seemed unfazed. "You should probably get back on the road. Long drive ahead, I expect." I couldn't argue with that logic, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was journalistic curiosity. I'd worked for the Boston Globe before the divorce, or maybe just plain stubbornness. Has anyone looked into this? Environmental Protection Agency? State authorities? His face hardened. Mister, no offense, but you're passing through. This ain't your concern. If fuel is disappearing into the ground, it ain't going into the ground, he said sharply. It's going below it. The distinction seemed meaningless, but the intensity in his voice gave me pause. What's below the ground here? I asked. He leaned on his broom, looking suddenly tired. You religious at all? The question caught me off guard. Not particularly. Shame might make this easier to understand. He sighed. You ever wonder why they built the Appalachian highways the way they did, all winding around instead of cutting through the mountains like they do out west? I shook my head. These hills are old, he continued, gazing at the dark silhouettes surrounding us. Older than anything. What's underneath them is older still. He nodded toward Pump 4. Some places, the crust gets thin. Things leak through. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. So what? There's some kind of underground lake that's consuming the gasoline? He let out a humorless chuckle. Ain't no lake. Lakes fill up eventually. The digital counter on Pump 4 clicked past $120. I noticed that despite the humid August night, the air around that particular pump felt several degrees cooler, as if whatever was beneath was drawing heat as well as fuel. So why feed it? I asked. Why not shut down the pump? His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear there. We tried that once. Winter of '97. Pump 4 had been running for almost 2 weeks straight. Owner before me decided it was costing too much, shut it down. He paused. 3 days later, the ground started shaking, not like an earthquake, more like something moving. Cracks opened up in the parking lot, big enough to swallow a car. Strange noises at night, like breathing. Then the dreams started. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature drop. Dreams? Everyone in town had them. Same dream. Something vast and hungry, pushing up through the ground. People waking up gasping, like they couldn't get enough air. He looked at Pump 4. Owner turned the pump back on. Dreams stopped. Ground settled. I wanted to dismiss it as superstitious nonsense, a rural legend meant to spook outsiders. But standing there, watching gasoline disappear into thin air while the concrete slowly sank around it, rational explanations felt increasingly inadequate. You're saying there's something alive down there? Something that feeds on gasoline? I'm saying there's something down there that wasn't meant to be disturbed. And now that it has been, we do what we need to keep it quiet. He straightened up. The way I figure, it's like those sacrifices in old stories. Small price to pay for keeping the peace. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. What could I say? That he should alert authorities? That scientific investigation was needed? Those responses felt hollow in the face of the impossible thing I was witnessing. The clerk checked his watch. Really should be heading out now, mister. Not good to linger here after midnight. As if on cue, the digital clock on the pump clicked over to 12 a.m. At that exact moment, the dripping sound from below intensified, becoming a wet, gurgling noise. The concrete around Pump 4 seemed to shift slightly, settling lower. The smell, that rotting, sulfurous odor, grew stronger. The clerk took several quick steps backward. Time to go, he said, no longer bothering to hide his unease. I didn't need to be told twice. I hurried back to my Subaru, the sound of my footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. The crickets had stopped chirping. As I started the engine, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The clerk was backing toward the station building, still facing Pump 4. And just before I pulled onto the highway, I swear I saw the concrete around that pump sink another inch or two, as if whatever was below had shifted in its sleep. I drove straight through until dawn, not stopping until I hit Kentucky. I've taken different routes on my trips back east since then, always making sure to avoid that particular stretch of Highway 52. Sometimes I wonder if I should have reported what I saw to the EPA, to geological survey teams, to someone. But then I remember the clerk's words about what happened when they stopped feeding it, and I wonder if it's better to let sleeping dogs lie, or whatever it is that slumbers beneath Mercer's gas and grocery. I checked online news archives a few months later. In 1997, there was indeed a series of minor seismic events reported in that region of West Virginia, officially attributed to mining activity. The local paper ran a small piece about residents complaining of insomnia and night terrors during the same period. I've never gone back to verify if Pump 4 is still running, still feeding whatever lurks below the Appalachian foothills, but sometimes on humid summer nights when I smell gasoline from a passing car, I find myself thinking about that digital counter, endlessly ticking upward as fuel disappears into an invisible void, and I wonder just how hungry that thing below might be, and what would happen if its appetite ever grows beyond what a single gas pump can provide. All right, folks, buckle up for this next one. We're not in Kansas anymore, but Nebraska's midnight highways have their own twisted version of the yellow brick road, except this one doesn't lead to Oz, just a gas station where the only wizard you'll meet is named Bathroom Out of Order. You know how they say curiosity killed the cat? Well, tonight's tale might make you think twice about poking around strange doors at gas stations in the middle of nowhere. I'm about to take you on a midnight drive where following the yellow door will have you wishing you'd clicked your heels 3 times and gone home instead. This story is The Yellow Door, a reminder that sometimes the only thing worse than gas station coffee is what's lurking behind their mysteriously colorful maintenance entrances. So grab your travel mug, crank up your headlights, and let's explore why some doors should remain unopened, especially the ones that clash with the interior decor. This happened about 15 years ago when I was driving cross-country to visit my brother in Colorado. I'd been on the road for about 14 hours at that point, having left Chicago early that morning, pushing through Illinois and Iowa before crossing into Nebraska as the sun was setting. I should have stopped in Omaha for the night. That would have been the smart thing to do, but I was in that strange zone of exhaustion where you're simultaneously too tired to drive safely, yet too wired to actually feel sleepy. So I decided to push on through the night, figuring I'd hit Lincoln and then maybe make it to Grand Island before finding a motel. Nebraska's rural highways are eerily empty after midnight. The land is so flat that you can see headlights approaching from miles away, little pinpricks of light that grow larger over the course of minutes rather than seconds. I'd pass maybe one car every 20 minutes or so. The radio stations had long since devolved into static, and my CD player had stopped working somewhere around Des Moines, so I was just driving in silence, windows cracked to let in the thick, humid night air to keep me alert. Around 1:30 a.m., my gas gauge was getting uncomfortably close to empty, and I realized I hadn't seen a station in over an hour. I was starting to get that anxious feeling that comes with being low on fuel in the middle of nowhere when I spotted a faint glow in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a small gas station just off the highway. It was one of those older independent places, not a modern chain with its bright lights and attached convenience store. Just a simple, weathered building with a metal canopy covering 2 ancient pumps out front. The sign was small and unlit, except for a dim, open 24 hours neon in the window that flickered intermittently, casting momentary pink reflections across the cracked concrete. I pulled in and parked by pump number 1. The humid air hit me like a wall when I stepped out of my air-conditioned car. It was the kind of dampness that makes your clothes stick to your skin instantly. The night was unnaturally still, no breeze, no insects chirping, just the dull hum of the overhead lights and the distant rush of semis on the highway. I slid my credit card into the pump, but nothing happened. The screen just blinked, "See attendant." Great. I'd have to go inside. The station's interior was bathed in harsh fluorescent light that somehow managed to be simultaneously too bright and not bright enough. A bored-looking attendant sat behind the counter, his attention fixed on a tiny television perched on a shelf. He didn't look up as I entered, even though a bell had chimed when I opened the door. "Pump 1, please," I said. He nodded without taking his eyes off the TV and pressed something under the counter. $30? He asked in a flat voice. "Yeah, that's fine," I replied, sliding 2 20s across the counter. He took the money without comment, made change, and went back to watching his program. I was about to leave when my bladder reminded me I hadn't stopped in hours. "Bathroom?" I asked. "Around back," he muttered, still not looking at me. I walked back outside and followed the side of the building. The back area was poorly lit, with just a single bulb illuminating a patch of gravel and weeds. I spotted a door marked Men and headed toward it, but something else caught my eye. Next to the bathroom, partially hidden behind a humming ice machine, was another door. It was painted a faded yellow that looked almost sickly in the dim light. Unlike the bathroom door, this one had no markings, no handle, just a simple push plate. Something about it seemed off. It didn't look like it belonged to the gas station somehow. The yellow paint was different from the building's white and blue color scheme, and the door itself seemed newer despite the faded color. I used the bathroom quickly, washing my hands in the rust-stained sink before heading back out. As I rounded the corner of the building, I noticed another car had pulled in, a dark blue sedan with out-of-state plates. A man about my age was filling up his tank at the other pump. When I got back to my car, I realized I'd left my wallet on the counter inside. I cursed under my breath and headed back to the station. As I approached the entrance, I saw the other driver walking toward the back of the building, presumably looking for the bathroom. Inside, the attendant was in the same position, still fixated on whatever was playing on that tiny TV. My wallet was sitting right where I'd left it. I grabbed it and was about to leave when something made me pause. The attendant's eyes had shifted from the TV to the security monitor mounted above the register. On the grainy black and white screen, I could see the back of the building. The other driver was standing there, but he wasn't going into the bathroom. He was looking at the yellow door. I don't know why, but I felt a sudden urgency, a need to go back outside and warn him. Before I could move, the man on the screen pushed the yellow door. It swung open smoothly, revealing what looked like a concrete hallway stretching beyond the camera's view. The attendant still hadn't moved, but I noticed his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the counter. On the screen, the man hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The door didn't close behind him. He stood in the doorway, apparently looking down the hallway. Then he took another step forward. That's when I saw it. The hallway wasn't empty. Something moved at the edge of the frame, something pale and thin that seemed to unfold from the shadows. It moved with an unnatural quickness, stretching toward the man. "Hey," I said to the attendant, my voice cracking. "There's someone—" "Don't," he cut me off, finally looking at me. His eyes were flat and devoid of emotion. "Don't go out there." On the screen, the man suddenly jerked backward as if being pulled. His arms flailed, reaching for the door frame, but whatever had him was stronger. In one violent motion, he was yanked into the darkness. The yellow door slammed shut with such force that I could hear the echo of it from inside the station. The attendant slowly turned back to his TV as if nothing had happened. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my heart racing. "We need to call someone. The police or—" "There's no one to call out here," he said quietly. "Best you get back on the road. It's a long drive to Colorado." My blood ran cold. I hadn't mentioned where I was going. "How did you—" "Your brother's waiting, isn't he? Best not to keep him waiting," the attendant said, still not looking at me. "Pump's ready for you now?" I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on him until I was outside. Then I ran to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The attendant had come outside and was watching me from under the canopy, his figure growing smaller as I accelerated onto the highway. I drove for hours without stopping, my mind racing with what I'd witnessed. When I finally reached the next town with a police station, I pulled in and told them everything. The officers listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They took my statement and promised to look into it, but I knew they thought I was either crazy or had been watching too many horror movies. 2 days later, after reaching my brother's place, I called the county sheriff's office to follow up. The deputy I spoke with told me they'd checked out the gas station I described, but found nothing unusual. No yellow door, no missing travelers reported in the area. He suggested that perhaps I'd been more tired than I realized and had dozed off at the wheel, experiencing a vivid dream or hallucination. I might have believed him if not for what happened next. About a week later, I was helping my brother clean out his garage when I found an old road atlas in a box of books. Flipping through it idly, I came to the Nebraska page. There, along the route I'd taken, someone had circled a spot in red pen and written a small note. "Yellow door, stay away." The handwriting was my brother's. When I confronted him, his face went pale. He admitted that years earlier, he'd also seen the station and the door while driving through Nebraska. He'd watched someone go through it too, a young woman who'd stopped at the same time he had. But unlike me, he'd tried to help her. He'd reached the door just as it was closing and had caught a glimpse of what was inside. Not just a hallway, he told me, but an endless corridor lined with identical yellow doors stretching as far as he could see. And moving among them, sliding along the walls and ceiling, were pale, elongated figures with mouths that could stretch wider than should be physically possible. He never reported what he saw because who would believe him? Instead, he marked it in his atlas as a reminder and warning to himself, never expecting I would take the same route years later. Since then, I've done some research. There are whispers online about strange doors appearing in remote locations across the Midwest. Gas stations, rest stops, abandoned buildings, always painted yellow, always unmarked. Local legends suggest they've been there for centuries, long before the buildings they're attached to. I drive through Nebraska sometimes when visiting my brother. I always take the interstate now, never the rural highways. But occasionally, when passing a distant exit that leads to those empty back roads, I catch myself wondering if that gas station is still there, with its flickering lights and bored attendant. And I wonder how many travelers have found the yellow door since that night, curious about what lies beyond, never suspecting they're being watched by something ancient and patient, waiting just on the other side. Most people think the danger on a midnight drive is falling asleep at the wheel. But tonight, we learned different. The real danger isn't what you see in your headlights. It's what's standing just outside their reach. The wrong pump, the wrong door, one wrong glance into the wrong dark corner. That's all it takes. And while your car might still be sitting there, engine idling, waiting for you to return, some places don't let you leave once you've stepped out. So next time you find yourself on some forgotten highway looking for a late-night fill-up, just remember, not every station is selling fuel. Some are selling something else entirely. And the only thing harder to find than a clean bathroom at 1 a.m. is the people who vanished before you.